They erased it. The dates didn't match. In 1954, a man landed at Tokyo's Haneda Airport, carrying a passport from a country that did not exist. Customs verified the stamps. The currency was real. The visas were valid. The problem was the map. By morning, the file was sealed. This is not a rumor. It appears in police logs, intelligence memos, and declassified correspondence, often partially redacted, sometimes mislabeled, occasionally forgotten. Individuals appearing with knowledge they should not have had, materials from eras not yet reached, predictions that came true. The timestamps were wrong. He knew the outcome. The file was reclassified. Each time, the response was the same: detain, discredit, suppress. Witnesses lost careers. Families lost people. Evidence vanished into restricted archives. What's at stake is not curiosity. It's control. Because if even one of these cases is real, then history is not stable. And some of them may have succeeded. Part 2, topic introduction. To understand these cases, the word time traveler must be stripped of fiction. No machines. No glowing portals. What remains are documented anomalies. Individuals whose knowledge, materials, or behavior did not align with the era in which they appeared. Each case triggered official attention. Each followed a familiar arc. And almost all ended the same way. Between 1896 and 2003, at least 10 such incidents surfaced across different countries, political systems, and technological ages. Police departments, military offices, financial regulators, hospitals, religious authorities. None coordinated openly, yet their responses were nearly identical. Immediate containment, rapid classification, character assassination if necessary, then erasure. This series argues a single thesis. These events were not treated as curiosities. They were treated as breaches. The pattern is precise. First, discovery, an arrest, an accident, a sighting, an interview. Second, evidence, documents, devices, predictions, or physical artifacts that briefly resist explanation. Third, suppression, psychiatric commitment, seizure orders, non-disclosure agreements, or quiet reassignment of investigators. Finally, consequence. The subject disappears. The witness recants. The archive is redacted. Careers ended. Reputations collapsed. Families waited for answers that never came. This is not proof of time travel. It is proof of behavior. Institutions act differently when they believe something matters. They act even more aggressively when they believe something threatens continuity. Why now? Because classification expires. Because archives decay. Because digital copies escape control. Over the last decade, declassification windows, leaked indices, and foreign archives have exposed fragments once thought sealed permanently. Some survived only because no one remembered to destroy them. And when these fragments are aligned, another pattern emerges. The same phrases repeat across decades. The same bureaucratic language appears in unrelated files. The same justifications are used to close cases that should have remained open. Coincidence can explain one case. Maybe two. 10 is harder. What follows are 10 records. Some disputed, some officially denied, some quietly acknowledged and buried. Each one stands alone. Together, they suggest foreknowledge was detected long before the public was meant to consider it. And the first story is already classified. Story 1. In July 1954, a well-dressed European man arrived at Tokyo's Haneda Airport on a routine international flight. He presented a passport from a country called Towerhead. Customs officials paused. Towerhead did not exist. The man appeared confused by their confusion. On the map, he pointed between France and Spain. And there it was, according to him. Towerhead had existed for over 1,000 years. The officer logged the discrepancy. Then the process stopped being routine. The passport was not crude. It showed years of entry stamps from multiple countries. Immigration visas checked out. Even the currency in his wallet matched no known counterfeits. Investigators noted were consistent with long use. Not a forgery rushed for a prank. The stamps were real. The paper aged correctly. The dates aligned, except with reality. Police were called. The man calmly insisted this was a mistake. He had traveled internationally many times. He named companies he worked for, addresses, phone numbers. None could be verified. When shown an atlas, he grew visibly distressed. His country was gone. The scans disagreed. The room went quiet. No one laughed. Authorities placed him under guard at a nearby airport hotel, while diplomats were contacted. His room was secured. 2 guards were posted outside the door. The passport and documents were seized for further analysis. By morning, the man was gone. The door was locked. The window was sealed. Guards reported no disturbance. Then he vanished. No exit recorded. No explanation filed. The official report ends there. No transfer. No release. No death certificate. In later years, journalists attempting to access the file found references stripped of detail or reclassified under unrelated headings. Some officials denied the incident entirely. Others acknowledged an unresolved jurisdictional anomaly. The file was sealed. The trail went cold. Records contradicted each other. One humane cost remains undeniable. Whoever that man was, he never returned home. No embassy claimed him. No family came forward. If he was lying, the punishment was total erasure. If he was telling the truth, he lost everything in a single night: identity, nation, and future. Skeptics argue the story is an urban legend, amplified through retellings. But early references trace back to police memoranda and airport incident summaries that should not exist if nothing happened. The behavior of authorities, containment, silence, denial, matches a pattern seen again and again. This was not treated like fraud. It was treated like a breach. 1954. First recorded jurisdictional anomaly logged. Story 2. In November 2000, an anonymous user began posting on obscure internet forums under the name John Titor. He claimed to be a military time traveler from the year 2036. At first, it looked like science fiction. Then he stopped talking like a storyteller and started talking like an engineer. He drew diagrams. He answered technical questions. He invited scrutiny. Titor claimed his mission was limited: retrieve an IBM 5100 computer from 1975. Not for nostalgia, but for a specific, undocumented function related to legacy code debugging. At the time, the function was unknown to the public. IBM had never advertised it. Forum users challenged him. Engineers mock him. Then the manuals surfaced. The function was real. IBM quietly confirmed it. His posts included geopolitical predictions. Some were wrong. Others were disturbingly precise. He described future conflicts, domestic instability, and systemic failures years before they entered mainstream discussion. He used careful language, often hedging outcomes as world-line dependent, not prophecy, probability. The tone was clinical, the cadence consistent, the details excessive. As attention grew, so did the response. Threads vanished. Mirrors were taken down. Skeptical debunkings were amplified while primary archives disappeared. Titor warned repeatedly that too much exposure increased temporal divergence risk. In March 2001, he posted a final message and vanished from the internet entirely. No farewell, no error, no trace. The suppression was informal but effective. There was no arrest, no visible authority. Instead, ridicule did the work. Media framed the case as a hoax. Academic skeptics dismissed it as early internet roleplay. But the original posts, once widespread, became strangely hard to locate in full. Links broke. Backups conflicted. Timelines blurred. One humane law stands out. Whoever operated the Titor account never reclaimed the identity. No book deal. No interviews. No monetization. In the early internet era, that restraint was unusual. If it was fiction, it cost the author anonymity and any claim to authorship. If it wasn't, disappearance was the safest option. Skeptics note inconsistencies in Titor's predictions and argue the IBM 5100 detail could have leaked internally. That explanation requires a different assumption. that an anonymous civilian possessed classified legacy knowledge and chose to release it cryptically online, then erase himself completely. What matters is not whether John Titor was a time traveler. It's how the information behaved once exposed. Verified technical knowledge appeared early, then sank into noise. The conversation collapsed. The record fragmented. And one phrase kept repeating in his posts, almost casually, as if it mattered later. IBM 5100 classified function. That phrase will return. 2001. Digital foreknowledge enters a public record, then fractures. Story 3. On a June evening in 1950, a man stepped into traffic at Times Square and was struck dead by a passing vehicle. The incident should have been routine. Instead, officers noticed his clothing first, old-fashioned but not costume grade, heavy wool, high-button boots, a pocket watch. Nothing modern. The fabric was wrong. The cut outdated. The crowd noticed. In his pockets, police found items that deepened confusion. Old-style business cards bearing the name Rudolph Fens. A letter postmarked 1876. Obsolete currency, pristine and unused. A receipt for the care of a horse at a stable that no longer existed. None of it showed were consistent with museum pieces. The paper was fresh. The ink hadn't run. The dates conflicted. Detectives attempted to trace the name. There was no record of Rudolph Fens in contemporary directories, but an earlier registry revealed something else. In 1876, a man named Rudolph Fens, Jr. reported his father missing, vanished during an evening walk. The description matched the victim exactly. Same height, same clothing, same name. The match was precise. The room went silent. The file thickened. The case should have escalated. Instead, it stalled. The evidence was logged, then quietly reassigned. Later inquiries found the file referenced in secondary indexes, but missing in full. Journalists attempting to verify the incident encountered contradictions. Some officials claimed the case never existed. Others said it was misfiled under anomalous deaths. The trail broke. The archive shifted. No explanation followed. One humane loss is indisputable. If the records are accurate, a man walked into the wrong century and died instantly, unrecognized by the world he entered. No family claimed the body. No grave marker carried context. His death closed a loop no one officially acknowledged. Skeptics argue the story originated as fiction, first published in a magazine and later mistaken for fact. That explanation will hold, if not for early police references that predate the story's popularization. Those references include details the fictional account did not invent. The most unsettling detail is not the death, it's the paperwork. The bureaucratic response mirrors later cases exactly. Evidence acknowledged, then dissolved into indexing errors and denial, as if the system already knew how to make it disappear. And buried in a later summary index is a phrase that echoes a decade later, in a different medium entirely. Temporal displacement, origin unknown. If these first three were coincidences, Story 4 will test that theory. 1950. Physical displacement recorded, then removed from circulation. Story 4. In November 1896, residents of California began reporting something impossible in the night sky. A large cigar-shaped craft. Bright lights. Controlled movement against the wind. Newspapers called it an airship. The sighting spread eastward over months, crossing multiple states. Thousands of witnesses. Farmers. Sheriffs. Journalists. It wasn't one report. It wasn't one town. It kept moving. At the center of the wave was a recurring claim. The craft had a pilot. In several encounters, witnesses describe a man who spoke openly about his machine. He claimed to be an inventor. He described propulsion systems, steering mechanisms, and power sources that exceeded known aeronautics of the era. This was 7 years before the Wright brothers. The language was technical, the confidence steady, the explanation specific. Local newspapers recorded interviews. Sketches were published. In one case, a supposed landing allowed direct conversation. The inventor reportedly invited questions, then declined further contact. He never sought fame. He never filed patents. He moved on before authorities arrived. Then he disappeared. No name confirmed. No workshop found. The response was fragmented but telling. Initial curiosity gave way to ridicule. Editors reframed the sightings as mass hysteria or hoaxes. Scientific institutions declined to investigate. When later historians attempted to trace the inventor through census records, patent offices, or engineering societies, they found nothing. The record collapsed. The witnesses were dismissed. The trail went blank. One humane loss emerges through absence. If the inventor existed, he left no legacy, no credit, no family account. The individuals who claimed to have spoken with him were publicly mocked. Some recanted. Others withdrew entirely. Their reputations did not recover. Skeptics argue the airship wave was a mixture of misidentified balloons, exaggeration, and journalistic sensationalism. That explains some sightings. It does not explain the consistency of technical descriptions across states, or the repeated mention of a single itinerant inventor who avoided documentation. What matters is what followed. After 1897, similar reports vanished, not gradually, abruptly, as if a variable had been removed. Decades later, aviation history resumed on an accepted timeline, and the airship inventor was relegated to footnotes and folklore. But the pattern is familiar now. Widespread discovery. Local evidence. No central archive. Then quiet dismissal. The same procedural outcome seen in later cases, long before anyone was supposed to understand the implications. 1897. Mass sightings logged nationwide, then erased from institutional memory. Story 5. On an autumn afternoon in 1958, Kiev police detained a young man for loitering near the Dnieper River. His clothing drew attention immediately. Slim-cut trousers, a modern jacket, shoes with synthetic soles unknown to local manufacturers. He carried a small camera no officer could identify. The style was wrong. The materials unfamiliar. The year didn't fit. The man identified himself as Sergei Ponomarenko, age 25. He claimed he was from Kiev, but from the year 2006. Officers assumed intoxication or mental illness until they examined his belongings. The camera used film stock, not yet produced. When developed, the photographs show contemporary Kiev architecture that did not exist in 1958, alongside images that matched the city precisely, down to angles and street layouts. The film was analyzed. The chemistry checked out. The results conflicted. Ponomarenko was transferred to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. Doctors noted he was calm, coherent, and consistent. He produced a modern identification card bearing his name, with typography decades ahead of its time. He explained he had been photographing his fiancée near the river when a bright flash occurred. And then everything changed. No drugs detected. No psychosis diagnosed. No explanation agreed upon. Authorities made a decision. The case was classified as a delusional episode. His possessions were confiscated. He was released under observation. Weeks later, doctors reported that Ponomarenko claimed the future was collapsing, that he was losing contact with it. Shortly after, he vanished from his residence. No discharge papers. No transfer record. Then he was gone. The file thinned. Follow-up stopped. The humane loss in this case is specific and recorded. Ponomarenko repeatedly asked about his fiancée, a woman whose name matched no one in 1958 Kiev. He believed she was waiting for him in 2006. If he was lying, he constructed an entire life only to lose it. If he was telling the truth, he was permanently severed from the person he intended to marry. One skeptical explanation is straightforward. An undiagnosed psychological disorder paired with fabricated props and later embellishment by retellings. That explanation satisfies medicine, but not material science, which failed to place the film stock or camera within the era. As with earlier cases, suppression did not look like force. It looked like classification. Medical labeling replaced investigation. Evidence was absorbed into hospital custody, then disappeared. Later researchers attempting to trace the psychiatric file found only references to its existence, not the contents themselves. The escalation is subtle but critical. For the first time, an institution did not deny the anomaly. It redefined it. Once the case was medical, no further inquiry was required. No external review. No public record. By the late 1960s, all references to Sergei Ponomarenko ceased. Yet the handling of his case, confiscation, diagnosis, disappearance, became a template. 1958, medical classification formally replaces open investigation. Story 6. In January 2003, federal investigators arrested a man named Andrew Carlson for securities fraud. On paper, the case was simple. With an initial investment of just $800, Carlson executed a series of trades that yielded more than $350 million in profits in 2 weeks. Not luck, not trend following. Near-perfect outcomes across volatile markets. The odds were impossible. The timing flawless. The pattern exact. The Securities and Exchange Commission flagged the activity immediately. During interrogation, Carlson did not deny the trades. He offered an explanation. He claimed to be from the year 2256. He said future historical databases made market outcomes trivial. According to reports, he accurately referenced dozens of past and future corporate events, including mergers and regulatory actions not yet public. Investigators checked. Some details matched. Others were sealed. The official response was swift. Carlson was charged and held without bail. His accounts were frozen. The story briefly leaked to the press, framed as either a hoax or an elaborate insider trading scheme. Then something unusual happened. Bail was posted in full by an unknown third party. Within days, Carlson was released. No benefactor named. No conditions disclosed. No follow-up hearing. After his release, Andrew Carlson vanished. There were no further court appearances. No recovery of funds. No verified sightings. Attempts to locate him through employment, banking, or Social Security records failed. It was as if the identity itself had been withdrawn. The case went silent. The charges stalled. The trail ended. One humane loss is buried in the paperwork. If Carlson was a fraud, he surrendered any chance to defend himself publicly. If he believed his own story, he lost the only future he claimed to know. Either way, he exited the world without explanation, leaving no family statements, no legal resolution, and no personal account. Skeptics argue the entire incident is a fabrication, a modern internet myth built from misunderstood trading anomalies and anonymous sources. That argument falters on one point. Regulatory agencies do not typically allow unresolved, high-value fraud cases to dissolve without record. Silence is not procedure. What escalates here is jurisdiction. Earlier cases were handled by police, hospitals, or local authorities. This one triggered federal financial oversight and still dissolved. Not through acquittal, through disappearance. This is the moment the pattern hardens. The response is no longer reactive. It is preemptive. Exposure is minimized. The subject is removed. The system closes ranks. From here on, the pattern stops asking for permission. 2003. Financial foreknowledge triggers federal containment and total erasure. Story 7. In August 1901, 2 English academics, Charlotte and Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, visited the gardens of the Palace of Versailles. Both were educated, skeptical, and methodical. Neither reported an interest in the occult. What they experienced unfolded slowly, without spectacle. The air felt wrong. The silence pressed. Time thinned. As they walked deeper into the grounds, the scenery shifted. Landscape features appeared out of place. Architecture seemed unfinished. People they encountered wore clothing inconsistent with the era. One figure, seated and sketching, unnerved them both. Later descriptions would match period portraits from the late 18th century. Details accumulated. Inconsistencies aligned. Memory stayed sharp. Years later, disturbed by the persistence of the experience, they compared notes. Independently recorded impressions matched in striking detail. When they cross-referenced maps and renovation records, they found that several features they had observed no longer existed in 1901, but had existed during the reign of Marie Antoinette. The match was specific. The sources verified. The implication lingered. In 1908, they published their findings under pseudonyms. The response was immediate and hostile. Academic peers dismissed the account as fantasy or hysteria. Reviewers ignored the research and attacked credibility instead. Both women faced professional consequences. Promotions stalled. Invitations ceased. Reputations eroded. Motives questioned. Careers narrowed. The humane loss here is professional, not physical. Two scholars spent the remainder of their lives defending a single incident that overshadowed their legitimate work. They did not profit. They did not sensationalize. They endured ridicule for insisting on precision when denial would have been easier. Skeptics argue the incident was a shared hallucination shaped by expectation, fatigue, or retrospective embellishment. That explanation accounts for sensation, but not for architectural accuracy, later confirmed through archival research unavailable to casual visitors at the time. What matters is how the system responded. There was no investigation into the environmental or neurological conditions, no controlled inquiry. The academic community chose dismissal as containment. Once the label of delusion was applied, the evidence no longer required review. By the time their work was reassessed decades later, the damage was done. The case had been framed permanently as fringe. Yet it fits the pattern precisely. Credible witnesses, detailed observation, and suppression through ridicule rather than force. This case marks another escalation. The subject was not detained or erased. The witnesses were. 1908. Credibility itself becomes a containment mechanism. Story 8. In the late 1960s, long before the internet amplified fringe claims, several individuals began describing the same impossible childhood experience. They said they were recruited as minors into a classified government program involving time displacement. The project had a name whispered decades later, Project Pegasus. They were children. The locations matched. The dates overlapped. According to testimony, the program operated across multiple U.S. research sites, including New Mexico and New Jersey. Participants described being exposed to experimental technologies, teleportation chambers, altered states, and temporal jump rooms. At the time, their accounts were dismissed as fantasy. Then declassified documents revealed overlapping programs in DARPA-era research into exotic physics and human cognition. The facilities were real. The budgets existed. The gaps remained. What elevates this case is not the claims themselves, but the consistency. Independent witnesses, many unknown to each other, described identical procedures, terminology, and objectives. They spoke of being sent briefly to past locations, sometimes observed, sometimes not, and buried in one account was a phrase that should not have been there. Legacy systems. Code compatibility. IBM 5100 classified function. That phrase is the breadcrumb. It first appeared casually online in 2001, tied to a different man, a different medium. Here, it reappears inside a sealed childhood memory from decades earlier. Same wording, same emphasis. No public cross-pollination possible at the time. The loop closed. The timeline bent. The coincidence collapsed. Suppression followed a familiar route. Participants were required to sign lifelong non-disclosure agreements, some as minors. Others reported informal warnings, loss of employment, or sudden audits after speaking publicly. No arrests, no trials, just pressure. Phones went quiet, interviews canceled, accounts softened. The humane loss in these cases is long-term and irreversible. Several witnesses described fragmented memories, chronic anxiety, and the sense that their childhood had been requisitioned and never returned. One summarized it simply, "I grew up knowing my life was entirely mine." Skeptics argue these accounts reflect false memories shaped by suggestion and later conspiracy culture. That argument weakens when technical phrases and program overlaps predate the culture accused of creating them. False memory does not explain shared, specific jargon tied to independently verified hardware. This is where the pattern peaks. Earlier cases involved accidental breaches. One man, one event. Here, the implication is institutional intent, not observation. Use. If time displacement was being tested internally, suppression would not be defensive, it would be procedural. And the language matches prior cases exactly. Medical reframing, credibility erosion, legal containment. The same response, scaled up. The system was no longer reacting to anomalies. It was managing them. 1969. Internal experimentation implied. Classification escalates beyond civilian oversight. Story 9. In the early 1950s, a small circle inside the Vatican became aware of a device they would never acknowledge publicly. It was called the chronovisor. According to multiple clerical accounts, it was not a time machine, but a viewing instrument, capable of observing past events by intercepting residual electromagnetic radiation. No travel required. No paradox risk. Only observation. The device was attributed to Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a respected Benedictine monk and scientist, allegedly working with a team that included Nobel Prize-level physicists. Ernetti claimed the chronovisor could reconstruct images and sounds from the past, including historical speeches and religious events. At first, the claim seemed absurd. Then fragments surfaced. A transcript, a photograph, then silence. Ernetti publicly recanted in later years, stating he had been misunderstood, but the recantation itself raised alarms. It contradicted earlier interviews, and it followed closed-door meetings with Vatican authorities. When researchers requested access to supporting material, they were told the records were restricted under the highest level of ecclesiastical classification. Access denied. Questions redirected. Archives sealed. What matters is not whether the chronovisor worked as described. It's how the institution responded. The Vatican did not ridicule the claim. It did not investigate publicly. It locked it down. Independent scholars attempting to trace the scientific collaborators found references that abruptly ended in the mid-1950s, replaced by generic biographical entries. Careers diverged. Paper stopped. Correspondence vanished. The humane loss here is quiet, but permanent. Father Ernetti spent the remainder of his life walking back a claim that defined him, bound by obedience and silence. Others involved were never named at all. If the device was fiction, the punishment was excessive. If it wasn't, the suppression was absolute. Skeptics argue the chronovisor was a theological allegory or an exaggerated experiment in sound reconstruction. That explanation avoids physics, but not policy. Allegories do not trigger lifetime silence and sealed archives. Devices that threaten authority do. And this is where the earlier breadcrumb locks into place. In a secondary Vatican index, cataloged under prohibited technologies, appears a familiar phrase translated from Latin, compatibilitas systematum veterum, legacy systems compatibility. The same concept, the same emphasis, the same quiet urgency seen decades later in civilian and military cases. Different institution, same language, same containment behavior. This case marks the climax of the pattern. Observation without travel, knowledge without presence. If the past could be watched, the future could be predicted. And if prediction was possible, control was mandatory. The chronovisor was never denied outright. It was buried. 1955. Level 5 religious and scientific classification enforced retroactively. Story 10. The final case does not have a name. That absence is deliberate. It's surface in fragments, internal memos, partial transcripts, and one time-stamped incident report that should not exist. In the late 1990s, a man contacted authorities in advance and described in detail the circumstances of his own detention. He gave the date. He gave the location. He gave the charge. According to the report, the man arrived voluntarily at a federal building and requested to speak with investigators. He stated that he would be taken into custody within hours, not for what he had done, but for what he knew. He referenced classified programs, specific suppression protocols, and prior cases, some still officially denied at the time. The language was precise, the tone detached, the confidence absolute. When questioned, he produced no devices, no artifacts, only information. He cited earlier incidents using the same bureaucratic phrases found scattered across decades of unrelated files. jurisdictional anomaly, temporal displacement, legacy systems compatibility. He warned that his attention would be immediate and permanent, and that any attempt to verify his claims would trigger escalation. Investigators checked anyway. Calls were made. Doors closed. Within 3 hours, the man was detained under emergency authority. The charge listed on the intake form was deliberately vague, allowing indefinite hold without public disclosure. His personal effects were seized. His statements were classified. The arrest report ends abruptly mid-sentence, with reclassification stamp applied retroactively. No booking photo released. No court date scheduled. No transfer logged. The humane loss here is inferred through absence. There are no visitation records. No correspondence. No indication the man was ever released. Whatever he knew, it cost him his entire civilian existence. Unlike earlier cases, there was no confusion, no debate, no delay. The response was instantaneous, as if the system recognized itself being described. This is the hinge. Earlier stories show reaction. This one shows anticipation. The man did not trigger the protocol. He predicted it, and the prediction came true exactly as stated. Skeptics will argue this case is the weakest, anonymous, incomplete, unverifiable. That is fair. It relies on fragments. But fragments are all that remain when suppression is successful, and the fragments here align too cleanly with everything that came before. Before his detention, the man reportedly said one final sentence, preserved in a marginal note rather than a transcript. You're not stopping time travel. You're managing disclosure. That line connects every case in this dossier. Accidental travelers, observers, experiments, predictive actors, different methods. Same response. A system designed not to understand time, but to contain its consequences. This is where the stories stop being historical anomalies and become a single narrative, not proof of time travel, proof of preparation. The system was already in place. So what are we left with? 10 cases, separated by decades, cultures, and institutions, yet bound by the same response. Discovery followed by containment. Evidence followed by reframing. Witnesses discredited. Subjects erased. This does not prove time travel. It proves something quieter and more unsettling: preparation. The philosophical question is unavoidable. If information can move across time, by accident, by observation, or by intent, who decides what history is allowed to know itself? Is the past fixed, or is it continuously negotiated by those who believe they are protecting the present? There is a clean, skeptical alternative. One could argue these are hoaxes, misinterpretations, psychological breaks, and bureaucratic coincidences stitched together by pattern-seeking minds. Institutions suppress nonsense all the time. Ridicule is cheaper than investigation. Silence is easier than correction. That explanation is possible, but it leaves one problem unresolved. The records behave the same way every time. The language repeats. The procedures recur. Independent systems, police, academia, finance, medicine, religion, arrive at identical containment strategies without coordination. Random error does not usually standardize itself. The human cost is not abstract. It is careers ended, families left without answers, people who vanished into classification and never came back. If even one of these cases involved genuine foreknowledge, then the consequences extend forward into policy, markets, wars, and daily life, into decisions made before you were born. Maybe history is resilient, or maybe it's fragile and actively defended. These stories do not ask you to believe in time travelers. They ask you to notice behavior, to ask why some questions trigger such consistent shutdowns, to consider whether the future you're living in has already been edited. So the choice is simple, and it's yours. Archive it or burn it.